plagued with idols and this idol worship and all this stuff that they shouldn't be doing. And so with Elijah coming and doing all of this and the confrontation on Mount Carmel, and although when you're doing a fast, Carmel sounds like caramel. So he's on Mount Carmel, and this was a purge of getting rid of all those idols. And they were in a famine because they were being disobedient to God and had all these idols in place. This is why the famine was there. And so after the purge, there was this, that was when he said, I hear the sound of the abundance of rain. And, everybody know the story? Does anybody not know the story there? And so he goes up to the mountain and he's praying, and then he tells his servant to go look and see if he sees anything, and there's just clear blue sky. And we all love a beautiful clear blue sky day, right? It's beautiful out there, the sun is shining. I know it's cold still, but it looks really nice. But when you haven't seen rain for 3.5 years, the last thing you want is a clear blue cloudless sky. That's the last thing you want. You're looking for clouds. You're just dying for this water to come. And so he sends his servant to go look, and he sees nothing. And then he prays some more, and then he sends him back again. He does this 7 times. And then finally the servant says, I see a cloud the size of a man's hand. I don't know if it's a closed fist or if it's an open hand, but in the grand scheme of the sky, that's not very big. I mean, I don't even know how he spotted that in reality. My hand's not that big compared to the sky. But he saw that, and then this is when he said to Ahab, Go up, say to Ahab, prepare your chariot and go down, lest the rain stop you. This is what Elijah said just after seeing that cloud. And the next verse in 45, and it's a different version, says this. In the meantime, the heavens grew black with clouds and wind. In the meantime, so before Elijah even saw it, he saw that tiny little cloud, and he's like, rain's here. And he's telling Ahab, you better get moving, or else this rain is coming, is so hard, so strong, it's going to stop your chariot. You're going to get bogged down. How many of you have ever been driving on the highway, and it was raining so hard, you actually had to stop your vehicle? You had to pull over to the side of the road. A lot of us have. You get crazy, and it seems to pass by fairly quickly for most of the time, but the rain is so hard, you can't even see. You got to pull over to the side of the road. And I heard a story, and I might not even get to my message today the way things are going, but that's okay. This is what God wants to talk about right now. They stopped along, so it's raining really, really hard, and so all these cars had stopped, but they had parked like this along the 401 under an overpass. So they had stopped in one on the shoulder and then one in each lane on the 401. That's terrifying because they're basically blocking all the lanes because they stopped under the overpass to get out of the rain. Well, it's well, you're in your car. The rain's not going to get you. Don't do that. Please don't do that. Anyway, and so he's saying, it's going to rain that hard enough where you'd have to stop your chariot. So you better get moving. And in the meantime is when all of a sudden these dark clouds came in. But before Elijah saw that, the dark clouds and saw this the potential for the rain, he's telling Ahab, you better get moving. He saw it before it happened. And so what God is saying is that in the meantime is when it happened. We may not be able to see it yet. And maybe, like Joyce was saying, you're getting into the fast and you're in the Monday and you're in the Tuesday and it's really, really hard and you're feeling like nothing is happening. God is working behind the scenes where we can't see. He's working in the meantime. Before Elijah saw it, before it was happening, it was in the meantime. I know for myself, it was a bit of a tough week for me, and not necessarily just because of the fast. That's a little bit challenging physically because it seems as soon as you do a fast, you crave exactly what you've stopped. Right? Anybody else attest to that? You crave exactly what you stop. And so, that was part of it. But for me, I was getting into these prayer times. And so I'm taking extra time to pray because of the fast and, setting aside time just for that. And it was like my prayers are just like coming right back at me, like going nowhere. I wasn't feeling the presence of God. I wasn't like, it was just like, what is going on here? It felt like this just dry and empty. And I'm like, I'm doing a fast. This is supposed to be a time where it's, I'm getting closer to God. Like I'm entering more into Him. And it was just like, it was so hard. And that was like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And I'm like, we're getting to like almost the halfway point of this fast. What is going on here? And I was driving down to Niagara Falls on Thursday morning. And I wasn't planning on going to Niagara Falls, and so this was kind of a last-minute thing. And so then I'm like, I don't know what this day is going to look like. Well, I can tell you, my dad ended up in the ER in Niagara Falls, and so that's why I went down. And so I was like, I don't know what this day is going to look like. So, I've got an hour and a half to get there, so I'm going to take my time in the car to pray because, I don't know what the day is going to look like. And so I'm in there and I'm praying and I've got my music going, and honestly I love being in the car like that. I used to do that in my truck all the time when I would drive for work, because I would just turn on worship music and I'm by myself in the truck and I can just pray and kind of do whatever I want. I don't close my eyes and pray. I make sure that I stay safe on the road. But I loved that time and I kind of miss it. I might just have to start going for just drives nowhere and just go and pray. But I was just on the highway and I'm praying, and all of a sudden the presence of God just hit me so strong. That presence that I had been seeking all week and just didn't seem to be there. And it just came on me so strong. And I mean, I'm crying in the car and, not to the point where I couldn't see, it was okay. But I was crying in the car and the presence of God was so strong. And He's like, I'm here. But even in those days before, the Monday, the Tuesday, the Wednesday, when I was feeling nothing, I didn't give up. I didn't stop and say, well, this fast is a waste of time. This prayer time is a waste of time. I'm not feeling the presence of God, even though I wasn't, getting what I would maybe normally get. I was like, God, I know that you're still here. You promised that you would never leave me or forsake me. I know that you're here right now with me. Even though I might not be getting those feelings that you are, I have no doubt in my mind. And so I kept pursuing. I kept pushing through, even though I wasn't getting anything out of it, per se. I know my spirit was awakened, but, you understand what I mean when, this, like, you feel His presence on you. And I was still pushing through. I was still pursuing. I was still running after Him for those 3 days. And then on Thursday, it just all came together and just boom, God hit me. And it was like, there He is. And He was there that whole time, but I really felt Him on the Thursday. And it was an incredible time. And then, I ended up spending the day in the hospital in Niagara Falls. And so it was, I was refreshed and I was able to, just be an encouragement to my brother and my dad when I was there. And God was still working in the meantime. On those days when I didn't feel like anything was happening, God was still working. God was still there. God was still moving behind the scenes. So even when we don't know or we don't feel like anything is happening, it's still happening. But okay, well, let's see how much of this we can get done, because I did have plans for something specific that I wanted to do today, and maybe I can see what I can do just about maybe trimming it back a little bit. But what God really spoke to me about this week, and I kind of put it together after Thursday and Friday when, after I had the encounter with God. And I felt like that after we did this week of fasting and it ends today, that we want to talk about consecration and consecrating ourselves to God. And there needs to be a purpose for everything that we do in the kingdom of God. And sometimes when we use that term, well, there has to be a purpose for everything that we do. It can seem like something that needs to be big and grandiose and it doesn't have to be. This thing that we do with purpose in the kingdom of God can be something as small as just growing your relationship with God, but it still has a purpose. It can be growing your relationship with a brother or sister, when we do fellowship. That's being done with a purpose. Our worship is done with a purpose. We're magnifying God. Everything that we do needs to have a purpose to it. Like, we don't pray just because. Does anybody here pray with a purpose? Does everybody here pray with a reason? Like, is there a purpose for when you pray, or do you do it just because? We don't give just because. We don't, as this past week happened, we don't fast just because. Sure, we can stop eating something. We can stop, maybe if you did a social media fast, we can stay off of social media for a little while. But why are you doing that? What's the purpose for it? What's the reason behind it? And everything has that purpose. Even sitting down and relaxing has a purpose. How many of you enjoy, we have some days or maybe some evenings or something like that, you had a busy week and you're like, I just want to sit down and just kind of veg out a little bit. I don't want to have to think about anything right now. That has a purpose to it as well. And I had a whole part about that, but we'll skip that for the sake of time. But even that has a purpose. God demonstrated it when he rested after creation. There's a time to do that, and it has a purpose. There's a purpose for it, and it can be unto God. Even watching television can be a good thing. You're resting, you're relaxing, you're recharging. You can still do it to the glory of God. And it doesn't even have to be a program that is about God. Maybe if you do watch something like that for God, then that's good as well. But it doesn't necessarily have to be, as long as it's, relaxing to you and you're not convicted not to watch it. But there's that purpose for it. And let's turn to Joshua 3, verse 5. And we're going to start with that there. So I wanted to start with this verse because the reason that I wanted to take time to do a fast corporately as a church is God is moving us into a new season as a church. And we want to get his heart on that. We don't want to move into a new season just because. We want to do it with purpose. We want to do it with reason, but we don't want to just do it to seem busy or to do something different than we've done before. We need to catch God's heart on this. We need to move forward with him. And so if we look at Joshua 3, verse 5, then Joshua said to the people, "Consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you." In this verse, they're about to move into the promised land. They finally made it, and Joshua says to consecrate yourself because the Lord is going to do wonders among you. Consecrating ourselves gets us ready for the next step that God has for us. When we are consecrated to him, we are placing priority on his plans instead of ours, and it will allow him to work wonders among us. If you look at the first time that the Israelites arrived to the promised land, they followed their own plan instead of God's plan, and it didn't really work out that well for them. They ended up spending the next 40 years in the wilderness just kind of wandering aimlessly. But when they consecrated themselves and they followed God's plan, they were finally able to move into that promised land that God had for them. And if you look, there's the term, I will do wonders among you in that verse. And if you look at the term, it actually, one of the definitions is it means the inner parts of a person. So, because when it says, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you, when you think about that, you think about the stuff that God did for the Israelites when they come into the promised land and, knocking down the walls of Jericho and helping them to defeat all these cities and just the miracles that he did for them. And that's definitely part of it. But it means just as much what he's doing inside of us when it says among us. It can also mean the womb, a place of birth. God is birthing new things. Or the conscience, the place of thoughts and feelings. Once again, talking about the inner part of us. What wonderful things are we allowing God to do on the inside of us? We can expect God to do great things in us, through us, and around us when we are consecrated to him. Okay, let's turn to Romans 12, and we'll start in verse 1. And this is a verse that's, very familiar to a lot of people. But, we're going to focus on the consecration aspect of it. And then this also ties into the fasting thing. Romans 12:1, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. What are we presenting to God? According to that verse. Our bodies. It doesn't say souls, it doesn't say spirits, it says bodies. Consecration is as much a physical thing as it is a spiritual thing. And this is why we do the fast. Because some people say, well, what's the point of doing the fast? I thought we were spiritual beings. I thought that, our spirit is connected to God. That's absolutely true. But consecration is tied as much to the physical as it is to the spiritual, and we see it right there. And it even says, present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, as it continues in verse 2, transformed by the renewing of our mind. It may seem like a contradiction in the new covenant, as I was saying, aren't we spirit beings? Isn't it all about the spirit? Because in the old covenant, it was all about the physical when they were consecrating themselves. We don't live in the old covenant anymore. We live in the new covenant. There were certain rituals that they had to perform to cleanse and consecrate themselves. They would wash themselves and wash their clothes. And, that wasn't something that they commonly did. But they would prepare themselves to consecrate themselves. And we're not required to do these specific rituals, but there is still a physical aspect to our consecration to God. The word for body, I looked it up just to make sure, the word for body in that verse actually means just body. There isn't anything more to it. It just means presenting your bodies. And the physical part of setting ourselves apart leads to a spiritual enrichment. And so these two things are tied together. And the verse speaks to that when it talks about saying how presenting our bodies is an act of spiritual worship. And we're going to look at James 4, 1-8, which ties nicely into this. It says something very similar to Romans 12, verse 1. James chapter 4, verse 1. What causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? Your passions, your desires, your cravings. You desire and do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. You adulterous people, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. When he says you adulterous people here, he's not talking about people that have cheated on their spouse. He's talking about people that are cheating on God with the world, having too much of the world in their lives, having too much of the world going on inside of them. Or do you suppose it is to no purpose that the scripture says he yearns jealously over the Spirit that he has made to dwell in us? But he gives us more grace. Therefore it says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Submit yourselves, therefore, to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. This is our key verse right here. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. This whole section talks about desires, passions, friendship with the world, and those things make us an enemy of God. Now, there's nothing wrong with desires and passions. These things are good things, or these things can be good things as long as they line up with the Word of God, as long as they line up with what God has for us. It's when our own fleshly desires, our own cravings, these things that we seek after, or our flesh seeks after, when we fulfill those things, as it says in the earlier, it's causing fights and quarrels, it's causing us to ask wrongly. We're trying to get a blessing from God because we're looking for something that's going to fulfill a physical or fleshly craving that we have. These are wrong desires and passions. And so our desires and passions need to line up with what God has for us. And then James says in verse 8, as we said, kind of our key verse here, to cleanse our hands. This is a physical act once again. We're cleansing our hands. What we do physically matters. It's as part of our consecration to God, as much as it is spiritual. And then it says, purify your hearts. This is our thoughts. This is us being fully dedicated and committed to God spiritually. It says, you double-minded. Double-minded defined as characterized by a duality of selves, as in one's desires or thinking, that are in opposition to one another, especially that results in a lack of decisiveness. When we allow that voice, those fleshly desires, those desires that we have that are contrary to God in our lives, when we allow them to have a voice, that's when we're double-minded. That's what he's talking about. And so it's at war with our spirit, which craves the things of God. And when we have those two voices in opposition, it says, it especially that results in a lack of decisiveness. We don't know which way to go. We don't know which way to pursue, because we've got these two strong voices screaming at us, and then we just do nothing. When we consecrate ourselves, when we set aside that physical craving, when we seek after God with that consecration to allow our spirit to be that louder voice, it draws us closer to God. This consecration affects every part of our being, spirit, soul, and body. 2 Timothy 2, verse 21. Therefore, if anyone cleanses himself from what is dishonorable, he will be a vessel for honorable use, set apart as holy, useful to the master of the house, ready for every good work. When we set ourselves apart, when we make a point of that, we're ready to do what God has called us to do. There's none of that it says lack of decisiveness. We know what to do. We're following after God. We are ready to do his work. Now, there is an aspect that we just talked about where we need to put down the flesh. We need to set that aside, that there's a physical part of our consecration. But one thing that we want to remember, though, is that Christ is our consecration. We can't be holy in and of ourselves, and just us changing something physically in our lives is not enough for that holiness, not enough for that consecration. That's just a part of it. We still need to remember that Christ is our consecration, and our consecration leads to sanctification. Again, something that we can't do on our own. Hebrews 10, verse 14. For by one sacrifice, he, meaning Jesus, has made perfect forever those who are being made holy. Our consecration, our sanctification relies on Christ. Without him, without his sacrifice, we can't. And he is making us perfect. But we still need to be committed to that. We still need to be dedicated to that. And that is where us doing that physical part comes into it. Jesus is fully responsible for our consecration and our sanctification. Our physical actions are part of the process, but not the whole process. We can't consecrate ourselves physically and hope that it leads to that sanctification. We consecrate ourselves completely, and then Jesus is able to sanctify us. John 17, verse 11. This is Jesus speaking here, and he says, I am no longer in the world, but they are in the world, and I am coming to you. Holy Father, keep them in your name, which you have given me, and that they may be one, even as we are one. Jesus said here, I'm no longer in the world, but they are in the world. And then if we jump down to verse 15 of the same chapter, so Jesus has just said, they are in the world. I'm no longer in the world, but they are in the world. And then he says in verse 15, I do not ask that you take them out of the world, but that you keep them from the evil one. We are still meant to be here. Here we go back to what we talked about, a purpose for everything that we do. If God didn't have a purpose for us, if God didn't have a reason for us to be here, then why are we still here? Why are we still around? If it was all about, I think it was Pastor Randy said that yesterday, it was just about faith and us glorifying God and us being in the presence of God. As soon as we were born again, we could just go to heaven. Because then we are 100% living in faith. We are fully in the presence of God. We're going to be worshiping him every day. But we still have a purpose. We still have a reason for us being here. Verse 16, they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. So we're in the world, but not of the world. Sanctify them in the truth. Your word is truth. And as you sent me into the world, so I have sent them into the world. Look at verse 19. And for their sake, I consecrate myself, that they may also be sanctified in truth. Christ is our consecration. Christ is our sanctification. I'm just going to wrap up with this really quick because there's something that I want to do at the end here. But there is a ripple effect to our consecration as well. When we're willing to stand, when we're willing to consecrate ourselves, it affects the people around us. It affects our immediate family, the people that we live with. It affects the people that we work with, because that consecration, especially with that physical piece, starts to affect our lives, starts to affect the things that we do, the things that we say, how we say them. And then the people around us start to notice those things. Hebrews 10, verses 24 and 25 says, "And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near." We have an effect on the people around us. And it's not just the people in this body. It's other believers, it's other people that don't know anything about God, and we can reflect that light to them. Our actions, followed by our encouragement, affect those around us. And we see examples of that in the Bible. And the book of Daniel is a great example of that. And I'm not going to get into that whole story. We've talked a little bit about this before, about a year ago. But just touching on it really quick, Daniel was an example to the other Hebrew boys. He said, we shouldn't be doing this. And they were like, you know what, you're right. We shouldn't be doing this. So his consecration affected them, and then it eventually affects the entire nation. You look at what happened, in that nation as a result of it, how it affected the king because of the fact that they were consecrated and then they set themselves apart. And the whole nation, they were like, realized that God was king, that God is king, and they worshiped him. And it started with one person. We're designed to strengthen one another as a body, as a family, and also correct as needed. We have taken this time to fast as a body so we can set ourselves and our church family for a holy purpose, God's purpose. There's a purpose, there's a reason for doing all of this. And that was probably a little bit shorter than what I was planning to do, but I hope that you that I was able to get the point across of what I wanted to say. That consecration, that setting ourselves apart, the physical side of it, the spiritual side of it. There's that whole piece. So, Joyce, if you could go back to the keyboard. I wanted to take some time today and just make a point of this. And so we're going to take some time right now, and we have a little bit of time, so we're not in a huge rush here. It doesn't have to take a lot of time, but I want everybody that wants to consecrate themselves. And this doesn't mean that you've fallen away. This doesn't mean that you're rededicating your life to God. This doesn't mean that everything's going wrong in your physical life and your spiritual life as far as that goes. But this is just an action for us as a church. So I want everyone who is willing to make that consecration to God to come up to the front right now. And we're gonna take this time. We're going to take this time to consecrate ourselves to God. We're going to take this time to just say, God, I am serious about this.